I'm joined today by Matt Farwell, who's a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. He's written a fascinating article originally in Playboy about a PTSD injection that has seen some remarkable success in some trials of it. So let's start there, Matt. I mean, maybe first it makes
Sure.
sense for those in our audience who may not be familiar with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the sort of symptoms and manifestations. What are we really talking about?
Well, so post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder that's been recognized by like the Psychiatrist Bible, the DSM, since about 1980, and has five different symptoms. And it's basically what you think of when you think of shell shock or a traumatized vet: nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety. Um, Odd behaviors, and so it occurs in both, war veterans. It can occur in rape victims, car crash survivors, anybody who's dealt with some sort of profound natural disaster survivors. Hurricane Katrina, for example, produced an incredible amount of post-traumatic stress in this country, both the event itself and the reaction to it.
And generally speaking, what have been the different treatment methods that have been available for PTSD in the past?
Well, fundamentally, that's a matter of some debate, but the Veterans Administration, which is probably the largest organization treating post-traumatic stress disorder in this country, they've pushed to what they call evidence-based gold standard treatments, which are fundamentally just talk therapies. One's called cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's where you try and figure out why you're reacting a certain way to something and then interrupt that process. And then the other one is prolonged exposure therapy, which is where you actually, with a psychiatrist or a therapist, go through the traumatic event in your mind again, over and over. The idea being that with repetitions of the trauma, it will eventually kind of release its power over you or transfer it from kind of the lizard brain to the more manageable prefrontal cortex. But the problem with those are they're effective about 30% of the time if someone sticks with the entire treatment. But a lot of veterans I know and a lot of other folks I know really have a tough time sticking with either of those modalities of treatment. So this is something that is a little bit different. And, there are also drugs that are prescribed with sort of off-label or side effect benefits for PTSD, antipsychotics, antidepressants, bipolar medication, mood stabilizers. But those can cause just as many problems as they solve as well.
So let's talk about this injection. Talk to us
Sure.
about how it works, what are the logistics of it, and how does it sort of function in the brain?
Okay, so the injection is called a stellate ganglion block, and it's a procedure that's been done since 1925 with remarkably little side effects or damaging the after effects that we would think of either both a surgical or a pharmacological intervention. Basically, put it in layman's terms, dude takes a needle about as long as this pen, jabs it in through your neck right about here, back to the vertebrae, back to right next to the vertebrae, and then injects lidocaine and another medication that I'm not thinking of right now. But, pretty common, cheap, widely available drugs. And they're not exactly sure. It was originally done for diagnostic and pain management purposes, and they're not exactly sure why it works for PTSD. Dr. Lipov, the man who discovered it, worked for PTSD and performed mine. He thinks it kind of, in a way, like burns off fraying edges of nerve cells that help your body's fight or flight reaction that grow following a traumatic event. So it basically returns the nervous system to a pre-trauma state, kind of almost like rebooting a computer or rebooting your iPhone will sometimes solve a problem you've been having with it, right?
Can you talk a little bit about how it's worked for you and what the changes have been?
Yeah, you know, as I said in the article, I got the injection done, and then later on that afternoon, it's kind of like having a dental procedure. You know, your face is all funny for half the day, um, and but my dad and I, we got this done in Chicago, and so my dad used to be in the Navy and was on submarines during the Vietnam War, so he wanted to take me on one of the submarines they have at the Museum of Science and Industry. Now, this is a World War II German U-boat. It's not that big. You know, my apartment is wider than, and my apartment's not that big, but is wider than this U-boat. And it was filled with people, filled with like, so claustrophobic, filled with people. And then they had lights going off and sounds going off. Now, normally that would be enough to what they'd say, trigger a reaction in me. I'd freak out, right? Like, just not a pleasant situation for me. It wasn't until halfway through that tour that I realized no alarm bells were going off. There wasn't anything, you know, troubling me. Like I was just interested in hearing what was going on. I was almost normal again. And so it was really an absence of feeling. And that's what I've noticed most since I got the injection is a lot of my anxiety has gone down. My mood is generally better. I can sleep, which for me to be able to get through a night without waking up with my sheets drenched in, you know, some horrible nightmare was a pretty like solid turn of events for me.
And Matt,
So it's
was
been
this a one-time injection, or is it done on some kind of schedule repeatedly?
so I got two injections at the same time, or I mean at during the same period, about 30 minutes apart. One was near the C3 vertebrae, one was near the C7. Uh, and different people may take up to one, two, three, or four shots. But the idea is that no, without real like re-traumatization or something, you shouldn't. If the shot's been administered correctly the first time and the second time, because the two-step process, then you theoretically shouldn't have to go back. I don't know. I haven't gone a year since I've had this. I've gone about 6 months.
And the
But
doctor that's performing the procedure has been self-reporting a 70 to 80% success rate with a sample size of about 300. Are those the most updated numbers you have?
right, and then there's been studies out of the Department of Defense because one of the interesting things about this is a senator from Illinois named Barack Obama was one of the first proponents of this, and he wrote a letter and got DoD funding um, to do this. And so DoD has replicated the process at Walter Reed, Fort Bragg, which is Womack, I believe, and in Hawaii at Tripler Medical Center, with somewhat similar results. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I can't give you direct insight into that. But yeah, it's been replicated. So,
Truly
but
amazing. Yeah, and
interestingly, the
go ahead.
VA won't consider it yet.
They will not consider it at this time.
No.
And do you know why?
Uh, well, I think two reasons. You know, one, the VA doesn't do anything without either public or congressional pressure. That's just, I mean, they're a large organization that are they're fundamentally good at what they do. Uh, about 80%, 90% of the time. But for those 20 or 10%, uh, you know, they don't necessarily bridge that gap.
Yeah.
And so I think it's both institutional inertia, I guess that'd be the polite way of saying it, and the fact that this hasn't come out in a huge double blind, largely replicated study that they could then certify. But they're not leading the way in studying it either. So it kind of puts it in a double bind because they're the largest funders of PTSD research in the nation.
Well, we will continue to follow it. We will also link to Matt Farwell's article about this PTSD injection. We've been speaking with Matt Farwell. He is a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. Matt, thanks so much for sharing your story with us.
Hey, thank you, David. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.